Going to do our best to get through it. So if we have any technical glitches, I'll apologize in advance, but certainly reach out to us if you do. I've got a short script that I need to read to open the meeting. As chair of the Environment and Agricultural Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with House Rule 67 and the Governor's Emergency Order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. This is a public hearing on bills referred to the committee. An executive session may follow. Please note that there is no physical location for members of the public to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that all members of the committee and select legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the Zoom electronic meeting platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously listen and, if necessary, participate in this meeting by Zoom platform or by telephone. All necessary access information has been made available in the House calendar and through the electronic calendar on the General Court website. The notice for this notice complies with House rules and RSA 91A. Anyone who has a problem accessing the meeting shall call 271-3600 or email hcs@leg.state.newhampshire.us. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Christina Dyer is the staff that is assisting us today. Please note that all votes that are taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. I'm going to hold off calling the roll until after the commissioner's presentation before we start the first hearing. So at this point in time,
Pardon me, Representative Pearl, due to 91A, we need to each member to state where they are and their names before we start the hearing. My apologies.
Before I have to do that before I do the commissioner present?
Yes, please.
Okay. Our clerk is not yet in attendance to call the roll, I don't believe. Oh, she's coming in the door now, so we're going to pause for 1 minute and let the clerk be seated. Yes, you're ready. You can call the roll. All right, when the clerk is ready, we're going to start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. I'll turn it over to the clerk when she's ready.
Okay, Representative Aaron.
Here in the committee room.
Representative Comtois here. Representative Verbal.
Representative Verbal is here, but he's working on getting audio in. He'll be in just a minute.
Representative Arnold.
Here.
Representative Stapleton.
Here in the committee room.
Representative Hamola. Here in the committee room. Here.
Can't hear you.
We can't hear you over the line.
Representative Mason. Mason.
Present, no one's in the room.
Representative Sanborn,
Present, alone.
It's very hard to hear you.
Gail Sanborn, present and alone.
Representative Bixby,
I am at home in my study alone. There are other people in the house. I'm in Dover, New Hampshire.
Representative Sofakidis. Representative Sofakidis,
Good morning. I am in my home, in my sewing room, and I'm alone.
Representative Bolden.
I'm here in the committee room.
Thank you. Representative Duffy.
I'm alone in my home office. A cat or two may walk by.
Representative Murray.
Present, and I am here alone in my room, but there are other people in my house. I'm here in Amherst.
Representative Von Quinsky.
Here at my home in Keene. My daughter's downstairs, but I'm alone in the room.
Representative Kaplan.
Yes, I'm here in Henniker in my home. There's a couple other people with me in the house, but I'm here in the study alone.
Representative,
Can't hear you.
Representative Highland.
Yes, Rep. Highland here. I'm alone in my home office in Francistown, New Hampshire. I just have the dog with me.
Representative Perez.
I'm here alone in my house in Milford with my dog and my pet rabbit.
And Mr. Chair.
I am here in the committee room. Is there anyone that we missed on the roll?
This is Representative Verbo. Can you hear me?
Ken.
Yes.
Yeah. But this time I'm going to welcome the Commissioner of Agriculture, Commissioner Sean Jasper. We appreciate you coming in today, and want to give you a little time to introduce yourself to the new committee members and discuss what the department does and how the committee works with you. Commissioner?
Thank you, Chairman Pearl. My pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be here in person, and I hope that everyone on the Zoom call can hear me as well. I'll try to keep my volume up to catch the microphone. So I have been Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Foods for just over 3 years now. And obviously this is our primary policy committee that we work with in the House, and for the past few sessions we've had a very good working relationship with the committee, and we very much appreciate that. For the returning members, this will be a bit of a refresher, and for the new members, hopefully give you a little better idea of what the department does, because certainly when I became commissioner, I didn't even realize just what a wide reach the department has. So I want to spend a few minutes just going over, and Mr. Chairman, at your discretion, it might be easier to answer questions as we go along, if that works for you. Dr. Crawford is also on the Zoom call, and he's available hopefully for questions as we go through the presentation, because some of the more technical things, particularly with the animal industry, he would be better suited to answer. So the general function of the department is to promote and regulate agriculture in all its branches, and we attempt to gather and disseminate information on agriculture, crop production, market activity, and other subjects consistent with the responsibilities of the department. We cooperate with other agencies in the state and federal governments, the University of New Hampshire, commodity and consumer groups in the public interest, and all who are engaged within the state of any form of agriculture or its allied vocations for advice on those activities. And of course, we do whatever else the legislature tasks us with. So to give you an idea of the scope of animal industry, and these are estimates because there is no exact count for any number of animals, but we have a fairly good idea. There are about 304,000 dogs in the state of New Hampshire, 332,000 cats, 37,000 pet birds, 21,000 horses, 1.67 million poultry, in 34,000 flocks. Most of those are small backyard flocks. There are only a few large commercial operations. 33,000 cattle, just about 7,000 pigs, just under 5,000 goats, 1,500 deer, elk, and bison, and about 2,500 llamas and alpacas. So a lot of animals to keep track of. Who are our constituents? Of course, the 1.3 million people in the state in about 521,000 households. There are about 4,100 farms reported in the census 2017, which is down from just under 4,400 in 2012. The Animal Industry Division supports and promotes agriculture and serves consumers and business for the benefit of public health, which primarily we do consider ourselves to be about public protection in many different ways. Public health is one of the more important things that we do in animal industry. Really is does what they do to try to protect public health, the environment, and the economy. And that we prevent and control or attempt to prevent and control contagious and infectious diseases of livestock and poultry for the benefit of the public health and the economy. Why do we regulate animal health? Again, zoonotic diseases, we're very concerned about that. That's, if we know or believe that there's a good possibility of the current pandemic we're in came through zoonotic diseases. So that's a very important mission of ours. Food safety, particularly now through the FSMA, which there's a bill on that later in the day, regulatory costs, the environmental implications of agriculture, disposal of animal waste and carcasses and all of those type of things. So the health risks, there are 1,400 pathogens known to affect humans. 60% of those are zoonotic. So it is very important that we regulate those areas. The core mission of animal industry is to control and eradicate contagious and infectious diseases of domestic animals and poultry per RSA 436. The division also has emergency preparedness responsibilities and response, state lead for emergency support function for agriculture, cultural, and natural resources. And that does take up a fair amount of time. Dr. Crawford's time, he is the lead person for the department in that. We are prepared to deal with the situation. We take it very seriously. Food safety support. We have surveillance program for eradication, monitors swine, garbage feeders, livestock dealers, poultry dealers, intrastate movement of poultry, small flock testing, importation requirements, official ID on sheep and goats, of course, the list of diseases. Of course, we work with the New Hampshire Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, which I share the budgetary oversight responsibility with the lab. Other activities, as the statutes direct, are license and inspection of pet vending businesses, assist law enforcement with investigations of animal welfare and abuse complaints. One of the things I want to note here is a lot of people think that we have that primary responsibility. We are not a law enforcement agency when it comes to animal abuse. The reports have to be made to your local law enforcement or the state police. We assist them when requested in determining actually the condition of the health of the animal conditions. But people do often call us thinking that we have the primary responsibility for that. We do not. We run the state spay and neuter program, which is very important. I'll get into some statistics on that a little later. Dr. Crawford is a ex officio member of the Board of Veterinary Medicine, and thankfully that the oversight of that board has been moved over into licenses, the Office of Professional Licensure, which is a big relief for me in terms of people thinking that I actually had some oversight over the actual board, which we never did. So, of course, on the administrative side, budget, rulemaking, we have administrative hearing processes, personnel management. There's a prescription drug monitoring program advisory council that Dr. Crawford is part of. As part of the Governor's Commission on Animal Cruelty. And those are just a few of the things. The greatest challenges we face as a department, particularly I think in the animal industry, is the resources do not match the job list. When I took over this job from Commissioner Merrill, she referred to us as being in triage mode. We are a little better now, having most of our positions filled, but we are still in triage mode on some areas. So we are constantly having to determine what is the most important thing, what are the most important things on our list that we need. Substantial non-agriculture and time resources really are the pet vending expectations. As I think you all know, that law was changed and reduced the number of pets required for licensing when it comes to health certificates from 50 to 25, which has put a big strain on the department. We only received one additional person. So we are really in failure mode, and I told the legislature and the governor at that time that we would be in failure mode in this program with a limited number of resources that we're given. We're doing the best that we can. We'll talk about database in a while. We need for that to help us deal with that. And I know I've got to speed up a little bit, although I don't start a little late. I don't know if I got my full half hour or not, but you know, where we're falling short besides pet vending, the growth in the number of small scale stakeholders, pigs, those people in many cases have little or no husbandry or disease at all. So that we have to do a lot of education in that area. And unfortunately, sometimes we don't even know about them until there is a problem. And so to decide what we do based on the list of things known, we can't do them all. We have to ask, is it a core mission of the department? Is it a food safety issue? Does it involve a zoonotic disease? Does it involve a threat to the state's economy? And prioritize based on 3 tiers. Needs attention today, needs attention this week, needs attention when we can get to it. We can get to it though, not usually very well. So I am going to try to go on to some of the other things. There's an awful lot that I can go on and that I'm going to skip over. The Animal Population Control Program, which is the spay and neuter, is RSA 437A, and the purpose of this program shall be to reduce the population of unwanted and stray dogs and cats by encouraging the owners of dogs and cats to have them permanently sexually sterilized, thereby reducing potential threats to the public health and safety from the mid-Atlantic rabies and other sources. I think we're doing fairly well with that. There are about 3,000 surgeries a year. We process 5,000 applications a year. 60 veterinary clinics participate, monthly invoicing, which I go through every month and sign after Dr. Crawford has gone through to make sure that the appropriate amount is being charged. And we field about 4,000 to 5,000 phone calls a year. There's one person in that program, and obviously that's a lot of work. And when she's out on vacation, sick days, the work piles up, and it can be very difficult to catch up. Within animal industry, there are 2 veterinarians, 4 field staff, and 1 office staff. So in addition to that is the person in animal population control. So that's a lot of work for very few people to do. One of the looming risks, and we just really became aware of it this last week, is all the brucellosis and TB testing has to be entered into the federal database. The person who was doing that on the federal level, the feds were actually taking our information and entering it. Thankfully, USDA was doing it. She died. The person is not being replaced. It is now our responsibility to do that, and that is going to really complicate things for us, because the risk of not doing that is not being able to import or export cattle and other livestock to and from the state. And so that's really not an option to not do it, but it's going to take away from other things. The Division of Agricultural Development really is our marketing end. They try to promote agriculture. And there's really just there, we have within the division, technically our receptionist is part of that. She fields she fields all the questions for everybody. And then we have one person devoted to market bulletin, and then the director herself. So not a very big division and not enough people. We tried to get a full-time position to assist there. We got a part-time person, and then before we were able to fill it, we were given a order to not fill vacant positions. So we're still not where we would like to be. The Weekly Market Bulletin is our official publication of record. And we have 3,500 subscribers both on email and hard copies. The division director manages the New Hampshire building at the Eastern States Exposition. By statute, the building is actually under the direct management and control of the Commissioner of Agriculture. Somewhat unique, that's not the case with all the other buildings at Eastern State buildings. And so that is our sole responsibility. And of course, Eastern State, when it is open to the public, draws about 1.5 million a year. And a lot of them go through the New Hampshire building. The division also partners with the New Hampshire Division of Forest and Lands and UNH Cooperative Extension to run the New Hampshire Farm, Forest, and Garden Expo, which, of course, last year was virtual, and this year will be virtual again, because that would normally be coming up right about now. We hope to be back live next year. The division is partnered with many other organizations and agencies we're working on promoting, and division director is a liaison with over 30 different agricultural organizations and assists actually in the establishment of many of those. And the director is also our Department of Public Information Officer. We published many different publications that are now electronic and hard copy. They go out to the rest areas on agricultural events within the state of New Hampshire, where they are, what they're going on, several maps about what's going on, and who's who in New Hampshire agriculture, listing the heads of all the organizations. Those things take up a tremendous amount of time. One of the things that I had hoped to accomplish when I was commissioner was getting a virtual map out there on the internet, and thankfully actually Cooperative Extension has worked on doing that. And so what I thought was needed is now really up and running through Cooperative Extension, so that you can go on there and find the various farms throughout the state. Of course, it's only to the degree that farms participate in that, but it's, I think, very helpful and be a great resource moving forward. The Division of Weights and Measures really has a lot more responsibility than I think many of us understand, and the Beer Caucus members will be interested to know that we're responsible for making sure that those cans and bottles are properly filled. And that's true of everything that is sold by Weights of Measures. that, you know, we are supposed to, and primarily do so when there is a complaint, make sure that what is in the packaging is correct. We license everyone who is responsible for maintaining those devices, all the service techs, and they're about, we license approximately 20,000 commercial devices. They all have to be licensed and certified every year. We don't do the certification. We audit the work that the people doing the certification do. And those 20,000 devices are owned by 2,800 businesses. And we license 945 Waymasters that operate vehicle scales that are used commercially. And all of that includes your propane delivery, oil delivery, anything that is delivered. That way, we are responsible for those. So there's a lot of areas that we have to deal with, and that's a very important consumer protection issue, because you know, if somebody's scale is not certified correctly, then the person could, you know, we don't care so much if they're getting more than they're paying for, but we are very concerned if they're getting less than they're paying for, and we want to make sure that happens. All of that extends into the area of cordwood as well, and that's one of the most difficult things we deal with, because people argue, oh, I delivered that wood, it's not all there anymore. So it's hard for us to know, but we do deal with that. We kept up with all our testing this year. Thankfully, we were able to both pesticides and weights and measures when they were testing for people who were needed to be certified. We were able to use the auditorium at the Brown Building over at the Gallon Office Park and test 15 people at a time. It meant we were doing a lot more testing than we normally did, but it wasn't something that we felt we could just say, oh, well, your license expired, you know, you can continue to do this without a license. That would have been less concern than the people who wanted to be newly certified. We had to test them, we had to get that done. We were able to keep up with that. Division of Regulatory Services deals with organic certification, good agricultural practice, seal of quality program, the commercial animal feed and pet food registration, commercial fertilizer, commercial seed, horticulture and growing media, USDA country of origin labeling program, farm commodities such as maple products, apples, cider, honey, shell eggs, local marketing, best management practices, ag nutrient management grant program, and agricultural land preservation monitoring program. So just to give you an idea here of some of the scale in that area, obviously it's a lot. The number of products in label review has increased 141% in the last 20 years and 68% just in the last 10 years. So we review those labels to make sure that the ingredients are things that the legislature has determined are legal to sell in the state of New Hampshire. In theory, we should also be going out there and processing, testing all of the ingredients and the sample in each one of those products. That is not happening right now because of staffing shortage. We don't have enough people. You can see just reviewing those labels is an incredible amount of time. There, between the feed and fertilizer products, we receive 17,000 products to be registered a year. We're above that now. And so that is an awful lot. I'm going to just stop on statistics there. Well, no, I'm not going to. I'm sorry. On organics, there's about 110 operations certified within the state of New Hampshire, 40 participants in seal quality. The animal nutrition grants, there were 18 landowners who applied last year, and primarily that's for manure pits and prevent runoff. So there are a lot of grants. We don't have a tremendous amount of money there. We try to really prioritize those and make sure that water quality is of most importance. The country of origin labeling products, there's about 23 stores that participate in that. The Good Agricultural Practices program, there are 10 to 12 farms audited a year on that. 900 companies have products registered with us. Told you the feed, there was over 17,000 products, fertilizer, over 8,000, 61 seed companies, and I will stop there on that. So pesticide control is probably the division that we cannot, I'm almost done. Pesticide division, probably the one area that we cannot really fall down on. We have to keep up with that because obviously people are out there spraying. So we control all the people who are licensed to do that, and we take that very seriously because if we screw up there, there'll be a lot of environmental damage and a lot of human damage. So while I'd like to go more into that, obviously the chairman's told me that I've got to wrap it up. The final division is plant industry, which has four full-time personnel, part-time apiary inspector, one labor intern in the summer, and deals with 700 plus licensed plant dealers, 400 apiaries, and really is trying to deal a lot with the invasive species, and that's both in the insect world and the plant world. One of the things that we're trying to do, before we really got hit with the pandemic, is to partner with other agencies and towns, conservation commissions, and really hit hard with the invasive plants. We have been anywhere down near Hartford, Connecticut, it looks like a jungle. And I have sworn that when I leave this job, we're not going to look like Hartford, Connecticut. We have to manage those invasive plants better than we are.
Commissioner, I thank you for the presentation. I would like to take some questions, but we're already 5 minutes late for starting our next hearing. So I think what I will do is if any of the members of the committee have questions, certainly either forward to me or directly to Commissioner Jasper's office, and we'll do our best to get those answered for you. And, all right. Again, thank you for coming in, and I know Dr. Crawford is on, and he'll be answering some questions, I'm sure, as we go through some of the hearings today. So thank you. All right, at this time, we're going to move on to hearing for HB 627 FNA. I want to recognize the prime sponsor, Representative Bixby.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the record, I'm Representative Peter Bixby. I represent Stratford District 17, and I am the ranking member of this committee. The HB 627 is a bill that is intended to create a matching fund for the USDA value-added grant program, value-added producer grant program. And this is a resubmission of a bill that we got last year, and because of the pandemic, we weren't able to study it properly. And it is a topic that I confess I have not actually studied as thoroughly as I needed to when I was resubmitting the bill. So this year's bill is very similar to last year's bill. The problem that the bill seeks to solve is that New Hampshire agricultural producers have had difficulty in competing effectively for USDA value-added producer grants because the program requires a 50% match, and that can be a substantial hurdle for a smaller beginning farmer. Neighboring states have programs that assist farmers in meeting the match requirement, but we don't. And farmers in our neighboring states have had much better luck in receiving these grants. The intent of this bill is to create a grant program to help New Hampshire farmers compete more successfully for these grants. In the course of preparing the bill, I did some homework, and the result of that homework is that I think this bill needs more work before it can really go forward. But that the bill does really, but if we eventually, if we get the bill through, it will fill a need that is really there. So I think it might be appropriate for us to retain this bill and amend it so that it can really fulfill its intent appropriately. I believe we have Representative McWilliams with us online, and she's had some experience in applying to this grant. So I hope that she'll be able to share some of her insights. I know she sent us an email with some data in it. So with that, I'll close my testimony, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions for Representative Bixby?
Representative Pearl, we're not able to hear you. Could you move closer to the microphone?
How about if I turn it on? I bet that would help. Sorry about that. All right, I don't see any hands raised. Thank you, Representative Bixby.
We're still not able to hear you. Is the microphone on?
Yep, I'm ready. I can try moving it a little closer. How's that?
That's better.
Much better, yes.
All right. Thank you, Representative Bixby. Next, we will call Representative McWilliams. I think we'll have to.
Can you hear me?
Are you able to get on? Okay, perfect.
Excellent. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Representative Rebecca McWilliams. My family owns and runs the Lewis Farm here in Concord, and we've been doing so since 2016. We also have farm mentors, Bob and Cheryl Perkins, who run Autumn View Farm in Pittsfield. So the story I'm going to tell you is a story of two farms. So we at the Lewis Farm have been slowly working our way up from doing a CSA. We're an all vegetable farm. We've been working our way up from doing a CSA to hoping to do sales at local grocery stores. Our mentors, Bob and Cheryl, have been doing sales at grocery stores for about 20 years. So they're a little bit more savvy than we are on this specific topic. So we have been very much aware of the value added producer grant. Both farms have been. Bob and Cheryl, because a lot of their large squash products that they grow, they actually need to send off farm to a commercial kitchen for processing. Namely, as soon as you chop up the squash and you're ready to package it and sell it to a supermarket, it has to be done in a commercial kitchen. So for them, it makes a lot of sense to hopefully apply for and get one of these grants in order to put a commercial kitchen on their farm property so they can chop up their large volume squash. I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of pounds of squash that they grow, rather than shipping it off site for packaging and then sending it out to the supermarkets. So they were really excited when they saw in the market bulletin that there were two farms awarded in 2020. Both got the $250,000 producer grant, and both seem to be food related. Obviously, value added means that you're not just selling raw produce, you're doing something to it. So we have kind of been this supportive relationship where my husband and I are the younger farmers. We're the ones going online and doing the research. And Bob and Cheryl are the savvy farmers who've been farming for 20 years and know how to make things grow, and also how to get it to market. So I did a whole bunch of research on the value added producer grant program just to kind of get a sense of, okay, what do we need to do to apply to get this amazing $250,000 grant? So my research turned up that really the way that this program works is that USDA insists that you provide a 50% match. So obviously you would need to be a fairly established business to come up with another $125,000, even if that's a bank loan, in order to end up with 375. Really, that's the goal, to do the producer grant program. So for Bob and Cheryl, that's probably going to be out of reach. They don't really have the means to get at another $125,000. But other states do have programs that provide either very low or no interest loans or matching funds to help farms actually achieve this USDA grant. So I can see why this legislation as proposed makes a lot of sense, because it helps a farm get over that 50% match hurdle. And certainly there are other ways to structure it. But from my perspective, I think that that really is a hurdle. If you want to do something like a commercial kitchen, it's going to be a huge addition to your existing facility. Coming up with 50% may be a lot. Just a little bit more background. So my family farm, we were looking at doing one of their study sort of planning grants, which is the lower cost, $75,000. So we would really need to come up with $37,500 for the match. That seemed like we could probably do it, but considering the current situation with COVID and some changes in the market, we are hesitant to put that much capital on the line and take the risk to do a small commercial kitchen at our own farm. We're thinking about doing canning. We do a lot of tomatoes, so logically next step for us would be tomato sauce. There's obviously more money in tomato sauce, and it keeps a lot longer than trying to sell raw tomatoes through the CSA or to the public at our farm stand. So this is just a tale of two farms that are kind of looking at this VAPG from USDA and saying, wow, that's really great money. We'd love to get at it. But financially, the obstacle to get to that 50% match has just been significant. And so I wanted to provide that testimony so you could understand the background. It is a significant hurdle for farms who really aren't making a whole ton of money doing what we're doing, but we know we could make more. It's just how do we bridge the gap? So I'm happy to take questions, but I thought I would at least provide some context for this.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions for Representative McWilliams? I don't see any hands. Do you? All right. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we will have Robert Johnson from the New Hampshire Farm Bureau. Are you able to bring him up?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chair?
We got you now. Go ahead.
Right, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Rob Johnson, and I'm representing the New Hampshire Farm Bureau as a federation's policy director. And for those of you new to the committee, let me give you a few sentences about what Farm Bureau is. We're a nonprofit federation established in 1916 of New Hampshire's 10 county Farm Bureau organizations. We consist of nearly 2,000 New Hampshire farm families and over 1,000 supporting members statewide. We're a general farm organization where members establish policy and direction through a member-driven policy development process. This piece of legislation, as Representative Bixby alluded to, was initially introduced last session. And it was introduced by Representative David Luno from Hopkinton. And he did it at the request of one of our members in Kentucky Creamery in Hopkinton. And their concern was they had just put in a dairy bottling facility, milk bottling facility. And they felt that they were disadvantaged a bit in that they were competing against producers from other states, primarily Vermont, because in the way USDA rule development is set up, New Hampshire and Vermont basically share an office. And again, he felt where Vermont producers, they could access state funding, New Hampshire, he could not. So that was how this was initiated. at the onset, I want to say that we are supportive of the concept, but as Representative Bixby said, we also believe it needs more work. You need more information. To give you a little background on the grants, the value-added grants can be used by a producer towards adding value to a commodity. And to give you some idea, it's where a product is undergoing a change in physical state, like a fruit to a jam, or it could be used for marketing or segregation of its product special characteristics, such as organic, grass-fed, local, that type of thing. Or it could be where a product is being aggregated and marketed as a locally produced food, like a buy local campaign or a state branded branding campaign. Or also it is eligible. Producers are, if they're linking a farmer with a local or a regional supply network, such as a farm to school program. So generally the grants range in the range of $50,000 to $250,000, though they can be less than that. And they are in a couple of forms. They're in the form of a working capital grant or in the form of a planning and feasibility. And most common, in order to receive that working capital grant, you first have to have gone through a planning and feasibility portion. My understanding with the grants is that they, as we've said, I think both speakers have said, they're matching, but on the producer end, that half of that funding can be in sweat equity. So, for example, if there's say it's a $50,000 grant, the producer is responsible for the 25,000, and half of that can be in sweat equity, meaning the owner's time and effort, that type of thing. Little background on again the usage, I guess, of the grant in New Hampshire. I found data for a 5-year period from 2014 through 2018, and in New Hampshire we had nine recipients of grants over that 5-year period. In Vermont, there were 17 recipients. And for further comparison purposes, in Maine, there were 24, and in Massachusetts, 10. Now you're looking at the difference in Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, again, 9 to 17. You got to remember that in New Hampshire, according to USDA stats, New Hampshire, we have just over 4,000 farms. Well, Vermont is 6,800. So there's a little difference there. And then in some years, like over the 2017-18 period, New Hampshire we received 4, but in Vermont they received 2. So I just think we need to take a closer look. But where we in particular, Farm Bureau, some of the issues that we see or questions we have is, why tie this money to just the USDA value added program? Why couldn't there be a fund that any value added producer for whatever purpose could access? And when this grant was initially thought of, it was really seen as just a small portion, just a like you might say a micro grant, talking in some under $10,000. We're not looking at some as large as what USDA. Another question is the Department of Agriculture the best place for this? Should it be at another agency? And again, the other pieces, I think there needs to be more information found on just what are the issues and what are the obstacles. And in the interest of time, Mr. Chair, I'll leave it at that, and I'm always available for questions or to seek further information for the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Are there any questions for Rob before we let him go? Representative Murray has a question. Rob, are you willing to take questions?
Certainly.
Hi, yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for taking my question. Does your organization have any idea of how many small New Hampshire farms currently would seek grant matching funds like this? Have you done a poll with your members or anything like that?
No, we have not, Representative Murray.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Rob? I don't see any other hands raised. All right, thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anybody else that would like to testify on this bill, HB 627? See any hands raised? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close HB 627 and we will take a 5-minute recess, or about an 8-minute recess, and we'll be back to take up HB 532 and HB 438 starting at 10 a.m. Thank you. Christine, are you still on?
Yes, I'm here.
We're having an issue with.
Okay. Hello. Oh. Yep. You'll have to mute your computer. Okay. I mute. Yeah.
Okay, try now. I'm going to let Representative Kennedy explain it.
So what we're having an issue with is people are going in trying to find a call-in option to testify, and they're not easily able to find a number. Can you email me so I can send that link forward?
License.
Sure. They should, it's in the calendar.
It's in the Gen Court calendar.
It is. They just might need the webinar ID to make sure they get on the right webinar. That's also in the calendar.
Okay, thank you. Christina, is there any way we can have someone from IT come down and take a look at our sound system? It's really hard for us to hear. It's not clear at all. Very garbled.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was, yes. It would have to look like that. That was where I was headed.
I'm sorry for cutting it close.
It should.
Okay, I just wasn't sure. I was following the chart that I got and I noticed the other name. Okay. Yeah, I'll probably move closer.
Yes, hopefully we'll get back to normal.
What I went through is I allowed, so anyone that is testifying, I allowed the option to talk. I'm not taking on you.
For a minute.
All right. Good. This is just a list.
I don't know.
This is the.
We don't even have a physical space for employees, so it probably doesn't. Should we have some
Yeah, go to Denver. You can really work. It doesn't matter if you say, oh, well, just make sure you do it.
In an ideal world, yes, we would.
Yes. Yes.
Is there any way for us to sign in for attendance or anything, or doing that?
We typically did.
why I know it might come. Oh my God.
It is. This year. We got a lot of.
Yeah, I talked to
Within the calendar year. Scale certified. December 31st, recertified. Yeah.
Oh, you're doing good.
December 31st, you know, you did it January 2nd of this year. You could then wait till December 31st of the next year. So you could go literally 2 years.
When they do the certification, because on jury month, we have the town and state, right? I would have them do city and state.
I'll just write it down.
Certainly not. Reasonable to say everybody has to be done.
That was the case with all these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Nothing to do with it. Well, they usually represent, yeah, they're, you know, say they represent the organization. But the reason they're seeing something that addresses that is something that addresses
What I've learned in legislation is too many enemies. Too many things at once.
The reason I was looking at this is because of a lot of emails.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
I think I would rather take it. It's also something for our staff to do. Again, it's a common.
I have 5 years for every single thing.
Well,
we have some great farms in Hollis, and I think it's really exciting.
Brookdale. Yeah.
I mean, all of them are great, but they've really got going on. And I didn't realize until this past year how big the farm pilot when I was, I saw some.
All right, being 10 a.m., I'm going to gavel us in for our next hearing, which is we're going to concurrently hear House Bill 627 and House Bill 532. They're both relevant to the animal database. So I'm going to call on Representative Peter Bixby to introduce House Bill 627.
I believe it's 527.
527, I'm sorry.
No, actually it's 532.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got it back. It's 532.
Yeah. 627 was the last one. For the record, I'm Representative Peter Bixby, Stratford District 17, representing Dover and Somersworth, and I am also a member of the ranking member of this committee. The Animal Database Bill is a request from the Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food, and the core issue is how animal health certificates are handled. And I'm going to be presenting some background and a little bit of history and a brief introduction to what the bill is going to be doing. Commissioner Jasper is going to be presenting more about the nuts and bolts of the program, and State Veterinarian Stephen Crawford is also going to be available to present his perspective on some of these some of the issues. What I want to start out with is, what is a health certificate? A health certificate is issued by a veterinarian after inspecting a dog, cat, or ferret, and it certifies that to the vet's best knowledge, an animal that is offered for transfer or sale is healthy at the time of inspection, and that certificate is good for 14 days. One common point of confusion is that there's also something called a certificate of veterinary inspection. That's a federal document that you need to take animals across state lines for things like dog shows or fairs or that sort of thing, or if you're going to be selling across state lines. Those are sometimes referred to as health certificates, and they are completely different from the health certificates that are being dealt with in this bill. So there are three purposes for the health certificates that we're dealing with here. One is to assure the purchaser of the animal's health. It also, a second purpose is to allow for the return of the animal if it's discovered to be unhealthy within a couple of weeks. And the third purpose is that the health certificate serves as a record of transfer. Until 2017, health certificates were required to be sent to the department. And when they got there, they were stored in printer paper boxes because there was no proper filing system, no staff to create such a filing system, and no staff to handle the certificates in an organized way. In 2017, there was a statutory change made in the trailer budget bill that made made submission of the certificates to the department optional. And this was because the department didn't really have a mechanism to handle them. In 2019, statutory changes made in the trailer budget bill changed removed the definition of commercial kennel, which had been used to determine which breeders needed a pet vendor's license, and it allowed that commercial kennel definition also had an exemption for small breeders who would breed up to 50 puppies or 10 litters. The changes in the trailer bill removed that commercial kennel definition, and then it changed the pet definition so that the threshold for requiring a pet vendor license was selling 25 or more dogs. And this created a need to be able to track health certificates better. But the submission of them is still optional, which makes it very hard to track them. In discussing this problem with the commissioner and the state vets, it seemed that the most labor efficient approach would be to create a database into which veterinarians directly enter the health certificate information. It also seemed that it would be beneficial to deal with rabies certificates in the same way in order to provide the state vet with a better overview of vaccination data and to provide municipal clerks and veterinarians an easier way to deal with them. Last year's bill, HB 1627, was designed to do this. It went through multiple revisions to strengthen the security and work out the finances, and was passed by both the House and the Senate, but was part of an omnibus bill that the governor vetoed for unrelated reasons. HB 532, as introduced, is the version that the Senate omnibus bill contained last June. Because of changes in circumstances, it's become clear that a bill that just focuses on health certificates is more appropriate at this time. I've drafted an amendment that narrows the scope of the bill to only animal health certificates, removes all fees from the bill, adds a sentence to the confidentiality penalty section clarifying that there is if a person is charged with a violation, that person could also face a civil suit. Removes language allowing the commissioner to pay back the IPM and scale funds from the Animal Database Fund, and adds a $250,000 appropriation in the second year of the biennium to cover maintenance costs. So once amended, what the bill will do is it will direct the department to contract with the vendor for the design, creation, deployment, and ongoing management of the database, such that the veterinarian will be able to directly upload health certificates, and the department will be able to manage the data to determine whether transferees of animals meet the threshold requirement to be considered pet vendors. It will put in place strict confidentiality requirements which will limit access of the database on a need-to-know basis and put criminal and civil penalties in place for violation. It will define animal health certificate as a record in the database and make changes to current animal health certificate statutes that reflect this definition. It will clarify health certificate waivers for animals that fail the health inspection for a non-contagious health problem. It will establish the funding. It will establish the funding for the development and deployment of the database from existing department funds, and it will request an appropriation for ongoing maintenance in the second year of the biennium. I got an email from the state veterinarian, Steve Crawford, shortly before this hearing, and he mentioned that there might be a potential issue with the confidentiality section and the ability to enforce the statutes regarding whether a person might be in violation. And I believe he's going to be testifying in the near future, and I'd just like to make sure that he comments on that. And he also mentioned that the term health certificate might be better, there might be a better term for that, and I'd like him to also cover his recommended language on that. At this point, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Do you have any questions? Representative Conklin.
My question is would this database be limited to this specific permit only, or is it going to be expanded at some point?
I'm afraid I can't hear.
Okay, her question was, is the database specifically limited to this point, or is it intended to be expanded into the future?
That's a question that the commissioner can cover better than I can.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Representative Bixby? All right, seeing none, thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.
All right, next I'm going to call Representative Comtois to introduce House Bill 438. You can actually, well, if they're having a hard time hearing you, maybe you want to move closer to a microphone. Sure, why don't we do that? All right, Representative Comtois.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Representative Comtois. I represent Belknap 7, and I am introducing HB 438. It's relative to the confidentiality of the animal records database. I have also brought forth an amendment. So what this bill does is it just protects the confidentiality of any animal records in the Department of Agriculture or any database that they may set up. But it will, at this present, if this passed as is, any records there would be protected from the right to know. My amendment adds in, after the word information contained in the records of requests for information from databases and any other information that the department might be authorized to manage in the future. We wanted to make sure that this covered anything so that it wasn't just specific to health certificates in case the database gets expanded. We want to make sure that people's information is confidential. Privacy is extremely important to people. I mean, I understand that we need to know certain things, but people's personal information needs to remain private, and that's what this bill attempts to do. And I'm open for questions, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Representative. Are there any questions for Representative Comtois? Representative Hamola? You'll need to speak up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. I was just curious that if the impetus for this bill was sort of a response to the potential imminency of having a statewide database, or is there another reason that had you bring this bill? There is another reason, Representative. Thank you for asking the question. The reason I brought this bill is currently there is not necessarily what some would consider a database, but they do have information where if you call the Department of Agriculture, you could get information pretty readily from them. And right now, that information is not protected. So we just want, so that was the reason for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any additional questions for Representative Comtois?
We have two on Zoom. Jeff.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking my question, and thank you to Rep. Comtois for taking my question as well. Can you define what you mean by personal information? Is there a scope to that, or do you have a vision for what that entails?
Actually, under the right to know laws, the information should already be protected, but personal data such as name, where you live, things of that nature, things that would affect your privacy if they're out there. I mean, if people need to know how many dogs or how many males or how many spays, that's general information. If they need to know how many health certificates were issued in a county, that's general information. But if they narrowed it down to, say, a specific town, and there was only one breeder in there, well, that would be too specific and would not protect your privacy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Bixby, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you for taking my question. Representative Comtois, would you be willing to work with me to roll this language into the HB 532 so that as an amendment rather than having it as a separate bill?
Thank you, Representative Bixby. I appreciate that. I think that I would like to keep this as a standalone bill. I think that maybe amending your bill to include this language, but I still would like to keep this as a standalone.
Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Representative Comtois? Do you see any more hands? Representative Aaron, I'm sorry. That's all right.
Oh, no, oh, that's right. Never mind. Well, can I heard?
You should be able to
be heard. Okay, well, I don't, I'm kind of not clear about, and I guess I could ask Representative Bixby as well, since we're kind of hearing both bills at the same time. I'm kind of not clear about how the records, these health certificates are being processed or searched or managed at the Department of Agriculture at this time. I mean, do they have any kind of spreadsheet that they, when they receive these documents, do they just stick them in a box and put them in a corner, or do they put that information somewhere on an electronic, in an electronic means? Do we know that? May I, Mr. Chair?
Representative.
Thank you. I think that the Commissioner of Ag can speak more to that. But I also want to say that a health certificate, just for people that don't understand, they're only good for 10 days. After 10 days, they're useless. A health certificate only is good for 10 days.
Thank you. Representative Bixby, did you have anything further you'd like to add to that?
I think that the commissioner can cover that more effectively in terms of how he's planning on structuring and using the database.
Commissioner, do you plan to testify later?
I would like to, but I think to the specific question of how they're managed now, if Dr. Crawford is still on the call, he would be able to answer that question much better than I could.
All right. Dr. Crawford, would you like to come up and answer that question now or save that later for testimony?
Happy to answer it now if you like me.
All right, please do. Thanks.
So the question I heard was, what do we do with the stuff, the health certificates we get now? We have people go through them because they only come in hard copy. We have people go through them and we do enter them into an access database that we keep here, just because it's our obligation to track how many animals a particular person has transferred so that we know when they hit that licensing threshold. That's been our understanding what the legislature expects us to do. When someone gets to the licensing threshold, they require a license, and that's the only way that we have to track how many there are. So historically, we did just keep them in big boxes, but now we actually take the information when it comes in, or as quickly as we can after it comes in, and enter it into an access database that we use here in-house.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any further questions for Representative Comtois? You see any more hands? All right. Thank you, Representative Comtois. So this is kind of a different situation this year because we're hearing two bills at once, and I have members that are signed up, participants that are signed up to speak on both bills. So I'm going to work my way through the list, and it actually looks like we only have one duplicate, one member that's signed up to speak on both bills. So I think we'll be okay just rolling through the list. All right, next I will call on Stacy Ober from AKC. Stacy, are you able to unmute?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
You can. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. Good morning. My name is Stacy Ober. I am the government relations contact in New England for the American Kennel Club. And I'm extremely grateful for the committee's continued working to amend this bill and get it right in terms of narrowing the focus and allowing the Department of Agriculture to fulfill its responsibilities in ensuring that only healthy animals are transferred and to also have the means to fulfill its responsibilities under the changes that were enacted in 2019. I understand this is fluid in terms of changes being made to the document. I did submit written testimony, so I won't repeat that. I do want to acknowledge the importance of ensuring the protection of individuals' private information, and that public records laws typically do provide exceptions for when individuals' privacy ought to be maintained. I know that the citizens of New Hampshire take personal privacy, individual privacy extremely seriously, and just wanted to note that even in 2018, on a ballot, you voted to amend your state constitution to ensure individual privacy and not intrusion by government into personally identifiable information. So I just wanted to make that acknowledgement, and I appreciate you continuing to work to ensure that those protections are in place, and to make myself available to the committee as you move through making changes to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy. Is there any questions for Stacy? Do you see any hands raised? All right. Okay, next I will move on to Nancy Holmes. Nancy, you're on the list. Nancy, if you're out there on the call, could you raise your hand so we can find you? Okay, I don't see Nancy, so we'll skip on. Maybe we'll give her a chance here before the end. Commissioner Jasper, did you want to speak again?
Yes, I would like to speak. I can speak to both of them. I'm going to turn to Dr. Crawford, perhaps, to correct me if I say anything that's wrong. First, certainly we don't have any problem with the privacy provision. My recollection is that any time that we have requests that would involve any of the information in our database, or whatever you want to call it, it's not really a database, but relative to health certificates or anything, we do not release personal information. That's redacted. If somebody's wanted to call up and say how many health certificates did Howard Pearl have issued, we would not give that information. And I think that Dr. Crawford could confirm that. But I don't mind belts and suspenders, but I think that portion of it really is belts and suspenders, but I don't see it as harming anything, because I want to make sure that whatever we do protects the privacy of individuals. So as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. The database itself, and I think Dr. Crawford said yesterday we're dealing with something like 80,000 health certificates a year. We cannot manage those the best we can. You know, they don't always get entered, and we're not able to really collate them in a way that's terribly helpful. And that's why we need this larger, more sophisticated database, so that we're not manually entering the information, which is what we're doing now as time allows. And that's why I said when we get to it. And the important thing right now is to get this process rolling. I would encourage you not to get bogged down in the details, because this is not going to be a database that would be going live anytime soon. I would be extremely happy if we were able to go live before the end of the next biennium. I'm somewhat skeptical that that would even happen. It's a little bit different situation, but we had a database for weights and measures, which unfortunately was developed by the prisoners. I don't know who thought it was a good idea to have state databases developed by people who were incarcerated, but they did. And that's what we're stuck with in weights and measures. Before I became commissioner, DOIT was awarded the contract to create the new database and to enter the information. And unfortunately, you know, that is not like what we're proposing, which is really starting fresh. This was going back and making the two of them work together. That was supposed to go live within the first year of me being commissioner. I'm now in my third year and we're still not live with that program. So I'm skeptical that it would happen anytime real soon, which would allow us to work out any kinks or issues that we have. I do frankly want to develop this database in a way that if the legislature should authorize putting other information in there, and frankly, you heard about the TB and the brucellosis, those are things that would be very helpful to have. I'm not asking for authorization for that. I want to make sure that we develop a system that, should the legislature tell us we can do it, that we'll be able to do it. Because we've got to enter the 21st century, or you've got to go back to the 20th century, in the early part of the 20th century, and give us a whole lot more people to do what you're asking us to do. We've got this conflict here of wanting us to do jobs, but not giving us the resources to do it. And if you don't want to give us the resources to do it, then take the responsibilities away from us. These are not things we have asked to do. These are things that we are required to do either by the federal government or by the legislature. And we certainly don't have the people to do everything without this database. So I'm not terribly concerned about what's in there right now in terms of what's going to get entered. If you want to take rabies out, that's fine. You want to, you know, the one thing I'm concerned about is having a funding mechanism going forward to maintain this, because these systems are expensive to maintain. We proposed a fee. My understanding is there's hesitancy to do that. Well, then that's got to be a general fund appropriation. If you pass this bill and finance has not agreed to give us at least 1 year in the second year of the biennium as an assurance that we'll be able to do this, I got to tell you, then I can't in good conscience take $1 million, up to $1 million out of my existing funds and put it into a program that is would be $1 million paperweight. Dr. Crawford gave me that language. I'm not taking credit, but that's what it would be, because we'd have no ability to do anything with it. So there's two parts to this. We thought it's reasonable to have a fee. I don't care how you accomplish that, but we have to have that funding. And we will continue, no doubt, to we, you, us together will continue to tweak how this database works going forward into the future, but we've got to get this train out of the station, and it's going to be a long haul to get it to the point where it's going to be useful to anybody.
Thank you, Commissioner. I actually have a question for you, and this may be better suited for Dr. Crawford, but if so, I can divert it to him when he speaks. What do you, do you have any sense yet of how you're going to implement the users putting data into the database? I know that I've heard in theory that you're going to have the veterinaries themselves input these health certificates into the system. Would that be done? Would they have access directly to the system, or would they send you a file that would be uploaded to the system later on so that the only access to the system would be from the department themselves?
No, they would be able to enter it from their own devices. They would have an access code. But the only thing they would ever be able to see is what they personally entered into the database. So they couldn't go on and say, all right, I'm going to put in Howard Pearl's name and see how many health certificates he's got, because I think he's using other veterinarians, and I want to find out, you know, if I'm doing. No, he would not be able to do that. They would only be able to do that. Town clerks, you know, would be able potentially to enter information, but they would only be able to see the information for their towns. The only ones who would be able to see the whole picture would be authorized users at the Department of Agriculture.
So as a follow-up, if the rabies is removed from this bill, then the town clerks would actually have no reason to access this database.
That is correct.
Okay.
If you limit it to that, at this point, we would be just talking about the veterinarians, unless I'm missing something, Dr. Crawford. But yeah, if we do it just to the health certificates. And there has, on that, and we're not proposing this here, but we need to, I think there's so much confusion about health certificates. At some point, we need to change that name, because people do use the CDIs as refer to it as health certificates, and they think it is. At some point, we'll be proposing we change the name, probably to something like certificate for transfer, so that people are very clear that it's not for anything else except transfer. And unfortunately, we didn't come up with that idea until late in the process. So I don't want to complicate it further, but we do recognize there's a problem there, and it does need to be addressed.
Are you willing to take some questions from other members? We have a couple of
certainly
hands up. All right. Representative Aaron, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you so much for testifying, Commissioner. My question is, I had heard earlier that the health certificates are only good for 10 days. So I'm kind of, I don't understand why you would have this information like on a long-term basis.
Because, if I may, because the legislature has set the number of animals transferred at 25 at this point. It was 50 before. So you get a health certificate on puppy A, then puppy B, and so on and so forth. Now, at some point, the animals are not necessarily transferred within that period of time, and the database would allow us to easily see, all right, there are 2 health certificates on puppy A, that only counts as 1 health certificate. But when there have been 25 health certificates issued for 25 different animals, that triggers the pet vending licensure requirement. And that's why they have to get entered, because within that 1-year period, which the legislature has set, as soon as the health certificates trigger that number.
If I may, Mr. Chair. Yeah. And so how do you track that now? You have an Excel file or some sort of file that the health certificates are input into, and then what happens?
They are manually put in. The technicians try to make sure that they're not putting it in twice for the same animal. That does happen occasionally. And when that happens, and we notify someone that they've reached the limit, very often they'll come back and say, no, you're miscalculating because puppy A got issued 3 health certificates. We go back and verify that. It's a very, very time consuming process. For a period of time, the veterinarians were only sending us health certificates upon our request. Dr. Crawford can correct me now. I'm not sure if everybody is sending them all now or just some are. I don't know if we're getting all 80,000 sent in to us. That's an overwhelming number. I tend to think we're not, but I'd like Dr. Crawford to speak to that.
Dr. Crawford, would you like to address that?
Sure, if you'd like. No, we are not getting all of those in now. That 80 to 100,000 is the number of official health certificates that if everybody was getting them, as the law requires, that would be expected just to maintain the cat and dog population in New Hampshire, based on average lifespan and not a growing or decreasing population of dogs and cats. No, we don't get them all right now. We haven't. We request them from veterinarians who we know do a lot of them, and some people just send them in because they don't want to keep them in their files. We don't send those back. We review those, and as the commissioner said, we do our best to assure that we're not duplicating those when we enter them. And then we enter them into an access database, as I said before. No, we're not getting all 80,000 at this point. An electronic database where ideally we wouldn't have to touch those documents. They would be entered by a veterinarian. Ideally, they would all be entered, and then it's much easier for us to manage 80 or 100,000 documents in the course of a year than it is doing them by hand. That's the answer to that question. I've got a couple other comments, but I'll wait on those. I'm going to let you guys ask other questions of the commissioner.
All right, thank you. I'll bring you up once we're done with the questions for the commissioner. Representative Kennedy, did you have a question?
Yes. So basically, this database, it's going to work something in Crawford. I come from a large animal background. So would it work like Global Vet Lake, where the client itself would log in, have all their animals in there, be able to print off the certificate if needed, and then, yeah, so it's going to, you're nodding your head. So it's going to be along the same. So with people have been expressing concern, well, if you include rabies there, are we going to eliminate the need for town clerks to even have their job? So now it's just between the veterinary and the state instead of the town being in the loop on this one. I don't know if Bixby or whoever wants to answer that, probably do their best.
I'm happy to, Mr. Chair or Commissioner, but let me know if you'd like me to.
Sure. Go ahead, go ahead, Dr. Crawford.
Not there yet. Thanks. The proposed amendment would take the rabies pieces out of it. Health certificates generally do not go to the town clerk, and they wouldn't involve them. This wouldn't be cutting the town clerk out of a process that they're normally involved in. The rabies process, my understanding is, based on the amendment, the rabies process would stay as it currently is, rather than add it to this electronic database.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And I think there's a little fundamental misunderstanding of, the rabies certificate would be under our original proposal, would be entered by the veterinarian. However, when a person went to the town clerk to register their dog, they would still have to have the hard copy, because the town clerk is not going to have access to who entered the rabies certificate. So there's no change on the town clerk's office, but then the licensure would be able to be entered that the dog had a rabies certificate and was licensed in the town, so that when there is a problem, that information is more readily available to law enforcement, et cetera. But it would do nothing to eliminate the town clerk's role in this, because theirs is about licensure.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions for the Commissioner? Representative Comtois.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have actually two things that I wanted to ask. Thank you, Commissioner, for taking my question. The first one is, it says that you, Department of Ag personnel would have access and others would have access to the database. When you say other, like, who else would have? access to that database?
I'm not familiar with that language. The last time I looked at it, I didn't recall that because I thought it was others authorized by the commissioner, perhaps. And I think that was just sort of generic language, but I don't know that that's necessary. Perhaps the sponsor could speak to that. That wasn't language we requested, but.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Paul?
Mr. Chair, thank you. One other question. When we talk about 80,000 health certificates, are we including the health certificates that are issued by the humane societies and the shelters per year?
No.
Because they're not entered into a database. They're not required.
Only veterinarians can issue health certificates. So we're talking about health certificates that are issued by veterinarians. I don't know what you're referring to because and Dr. Crawford may be able to speak better to the issue than I can, but I'm not familiar with an exemption for animals being transferred by shelters not having health certificates, because it's all about diseases really, and making sure that we're transferring healthy animals. So.
Dr. Crawford, did you have anything you could add to that?
Sure, happy to. So there is an exemption that falls somewhere between Representative Comtois and the commissioner. Animal shelters are exempt from writing these official health certificates for locally surrendered animals. So any animal they import into the state has to come with that interstate certificate of inspection that you heard about, and has to get one of these official health certificates before it is made available to the public. And we do keep records of those when we get them as well. And we don't get all the health certificates that are written at this point, but we do get some of the official health certificates for those shelter animals that have been imported and then transferred out. But so there are some dogs or cats transferred from shelters that do require an official health certificate, but not all of them.
Did you have a follow-up?
I did have a follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Crawford. So I guess my question was, when you say there's 80,000 health certificates per year roughly being issued in the state, does that include those that are exempt? Does that number include the ones that are exempt from having to send them to the department?
No, it would not. That's a fair point. No, it would not. I'd have to go back and look at the math. And I don't know whether when I did that a couple of years ago, whether I excluded them or not, but I would say without knowing, no, it wouldn't include those. And it wouldn't require a health certificate.
Thank you. Dr. Crawford, did you have any further comments that you wanted to put into testimony?
I do, if it's all right, thanks. I think the commissioner hit the nail on the head. Getting the process rolling and sort of understanding the long-term funding obligations of this system are our primary interests. I wanted to touch on the records protection comment that I had sent in the email this morning to Representative Bixby when I looked through the proposed amendment. And it's, I'm not sure why I hadn't noticed it before, and I apologize for not. So as written, at least, it would presumably prohibit law enforcement from getting those records and the department from sharing them without a court order. When you look in the penalty provision, and I'll apologize for averting my eyes, I'm looking at my other computer screen trying to pull up the language so I can read it to you. The penalty section in RSA 437, the first penalty is a pet vendor who transfers animals without having a license to do so as required by this chapter shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. So it's a criminal penalty that the legislature currently has in statute. The department doesn't have the means or the authority to enforce criminal activity or criminal penalties. The second provision is administrative stuff, and that's usually what we use, license, fines and other stuff. So our approach when we deal with these folks that are approaching approaching the obligation to get licensed, we usually send them a heads up letter. Hey, you're getting close to what the law says you have to get licensed. Most of them are amenable and work with us. Some are not. And some, even after they've crossed that threshold, they're resistant to getting licensed. So it is our practice to only communicate in writing with these folks. And after we've sent them one or two of these warning letters that you have to get licensed, we will commonly carbon copy that to either the local police or the animal control officer, so they're aware. It's up to them whether or not they want to pursue criminal activity. As proposed, these record protections would prohibit us from doing that, is my understanding. And I'm unclear, I guess, how or if the criminal penalty would still be warranted at that point. Yeah, I apologize for only noticing that when I read the amendment this morning and not picking it up earlier on in the process.
Thank you, Dr. Crawford. I'm sure.
I apologize. And I'm reading too fast. So there is currently a record protection provision in another chapter of law that we have in RC 436 that protects all animal records, animal health records from public disclosure, which again seems reasonable and has worked. But that exemption in 436:6-A goes on to say disclosure to local, state, and federal officials is not public disclosure. And this exemption does not affect the disclosure of information used in reportable animal health investigations under this chapter. So it protects them from the public, but it allows disclosure as appropriate to other government officials and when there's a public health threat, presumably. So again, there's already some language in statute, and maybe that was, I was curious how the two of those would work together as well. Apologies for stumbling over myself there.
All right, thank you, Dr. Crawford. Representative Mola, did you have a question? Certainly.
Yes, sir. I just want to make sure I understand the database need correctly. And the need for the database is, if I understand this correctly, that the system, when you were able to just have a requirement for 50 animals to practice health certificates, it was already taxing the Department of Agriculture. And then the change to down to 25 exacerbated that. Do I understand that correctly?
That's correct. We've been talking about databases that we need within the department anyhow. And it was obvious that we needed to modernize, and we're trying to figure out, we're stuck on this weights and measures one, but we're going to have to continue to do that with all the divisions. This is one certainly that rose to the top because of the change, but the need was already there. And there are, as I said, there are other needs. I mean, we should be looking at putting in the TB and the brucellosis so that we can, even when the feds were doing it, it was still a lot of work that had to be prepared to get the information to them. We need to modernize. I mean, we can't think that we can maintain a growing population with a static number of employees and more requirements. So yes, this has made it a crisis for us. We are in failure mode when it comes to the pet vending statute. And again, the record will show that we have said that as soon as this was proposed, that we cannot do what we've been asked to do. We are not doing what we've been asked to do. No surprise to anybody.
If I could add a follow-up to that.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Sure.
Thank you. The follow-up I had to that is understanding the moving budget squeeze that we all sort of anticipate in this coming year. As a stopgap, is it cheaper to have a database or hire people on a 10-year plan to at least get over this initial crisis?
Well,
thank you.
Thank you for the
I
question.
understand you don't want to go backwards. That's not what
No,
I'm
no,
trying to
but
do. How do you do it all?
frankly, I'm not sure that when you look at it that it's cheaper, even in the short term. Certainly, we could potentially get there quicker, but more expensively. I don't know where the money would come. But we also don't have any place to house people. We literally are out of space at the Department of Agriculture. And by the way, just because probably most people don't know it, we pay rent to administrative services. We pay a lot of rent to administrative services. So space isn't free. And then they add, administrative costs to everything. So even in the short term, it's not cheaper.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Murray, did you have a question? I see your hand is up.
I did. I have two separate questions. So I just to clarify with Dr. Crawford, if I may, you were referring in your last testimony, just rewinding a moment, to the amendment for, since we're looking at both bills, was that HB 438 that you were referencing, the question of how it would work with what's already in statute?
No, it was Representative Bixby's amendment. That's the only one that I had.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No problem.
And then my second question was with regard to this federal database, or the Versalosis and the TB requirement. And do you have any further information of whether you would be adding this information yourselves as a department to the federal database, or are you required to take over it and contain that information within the department?
So that's a fully separate program than the one we're talking about here. But if you'll indulge me, just the brucellosis and tuberculosis information that every state has to enter into this federal database. Each state is obligated to get their own information entered. We've just been fortunate enough for a long time to have our local USDA folks do it for us. You heard the story as to why that's not going to be able to happen going forward, and so we're trying to figure out. We've already signed up for training on entry into that database, me and another one of our staff. So we'll have to take that over at some point here in the near future once we get trained and are granted access to that database.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
All right, seeing no further questions, I'm going to move on to, looks like Nancy Holmes is with us now. Nancy, are you able to unmute and present testimony?
How's that?
We got you. So Nancy,
Okay.
we're hearing both bills concurrently, 532 and 438, and I have you listed as wanting to testify on both. So I'm going to ask that you just put your comments together and present them on both bills if you're able to do that.
I think so. On the one that just has the information on how everything is going to be kept safe, that's the first one. I'm sorry, I don't have the number in front of me right now. On that one, I listed myself as neutral because as far as I'm concerned, reading that bill and reading 532, there's absolutely no privacy possible with the current 532 bill. So that was why I felt neutral on the listing. I think there's some wording that could be changed in that one, and taking out the rabies access information because it's not needed if you go with the amended version of the bill. However, I have seen the amended version of what is it, HB 532. I've seen it, and I see some serious holes and problems in it. In general, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is you've all gotten my written testimony, I know, and I hold by that. But what I wanted to make clear was there are ways to transmit data between businesses or governments or people, whatever, without anybody logging into the other person's database. It's a decades old technology. It's used all the time to keep people out of each other's systems. And it's called Electronic Data Interchange, or EDI. It's easily looked up on the internet to see how it works. I wouldn't say that we wanted to use the strict protocols that are found in EDI systems. But what I would say is you can use the concept, which is I have a file I want to send to you. I drop it off in a lockbox type location. You pick it up, you screen it, you determine that it's safe to add to your database, and then your programs add it to your database. There's no veterinarians logging into the database. There's no pet vendors logging into your database. There's just a transmission of data. The number of places in the bill that show that different people can log into the database and do this and that and the other thing, including others as the department determines. To me, that means there's absolutely no security whatsoever for that database. If everybody's going to have their fingers in it, it's going to make it far easier to hack. I'd rather see the department only be able to touch that database, and then have the systems where information is transmitted into it be automated. Think of it like how you pick up food from a restaurant now. You don't go in the restaurant. They don't come into your house to deliver it. You have a secure location, maybe a parking lot, and they drop it off with you. So that was, I wanted to kind of go over the concept of EDI with you for that. And I can say in the bill, there was still established fees. There was, still is outlining the bill itself is outlining what I think of as outmoded methods for transmission of data between like veterinarians and the department, which nobody should be logging into that database except the department when they're using it for reporting or for maintenance. Among other things, this is going to really reduce a lot of costs, because if you have all those people touching that database, they're all going to need tech support. Notice how much fun we've been having with Zoom. Okay, I include myself in that. Everybody is going to have at least probably 2 people in their business that's going to be wanting to access the database, because you can't just have one person do it. You're going to have a backup person for when that person's out sick. All of those things, combined, the fewer people you have that have programs that are directly accessing the database, the less tech support you have to deal with. Anytime you make a update or change things, the more people who are using programs specifically to access the database at the department, the more people will have to go through upgrades and, again, tech support. This isn't cheap stuff. So I think you could really cut costs on how much things will end up running for the department in terms of getting things done. And you may be able to easily cut the number of personnel needed also, simply by ruling out all the extra access to the database. And it's easily done. I think the bill right now is just, it's not taking into account all of the security holes that it's creating. I have a problem with that. Of course, I'm with everybody else in having a problem on the rabies information being in the database. I don't want to see it in there. I want to be able to walk into my town and get my rabies, have my rabies vaccination information already there, because my vet sends it to the town that I live in. And just get my licenses without waiting for somebody to hopefully log on to a database at the state level, and hopefully be able to get that information quickly, and hopefully be able to then input it into the town system. It's making it too complicated, and I think that kind of complication, again, it leaves holes in the system. All right, I'd be happy to take any questions. I think I've covered pretty quickly everything I was hoping to. There's a bunch of nitpicky things I saw in the amendment too, but that's the major stuff, is that security hole is gigantic. And I say that from a background of computer systems.
Thank you, Nancy. Are you willing to take any questions?
Absolutely.
Representative Dutsey has her hand up. Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I just did. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chairman Pearl, for allowing my question. Ms. Holmes, the question that I had, are you suggesting that the architecture of the database should be put into statute?
I'm saying that I believe it is right now being put into statute, because of the way it is talking about how people will access it, who will access it, and so on. I think that wording needs to be out of there, so that a level of secure system could be created. But the way it's in here is it's got veterinarians signing in to look at health certificates after they've already submitted them. It's got pet vendors, including shelters, signing in to look at stuff on the database that's not needed. These places may need to transmit data to the database, but they don't need to access it afterwards. And the transmission can be done securely instead of by somebody logging in.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Do you see any other hands up? All right, thank you, Nancy. We appreciate you coming in and testifying.
Thank you for having me.
All right, next we have Angela Ferrari from the Dogs Group. Angela, are you able to unmute?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Chairman Pearl and members of the House E&A Committee, for letting me speak to you today. I am a representative of dog owners of the Granite State, And just for those of you who haven't heard me speak at prior hearings, I've been working with this organization that is an American Kennel Club affiliated nonprofit organization founded back in 1991. And we're here to represent the interests of all pet owners. We have a really robust community of breed clubs, kennel clubs, dog and cat breeders, veterinarians, mushers, hunters, and livestock guardian dog owners, just for a little background. I have a few points to touch on. I think the conversation has been really great today and a lot of good information has been raised. While I do appreciate Commissioner Jasper not wanting to get into the details here, there are a lot of details in this bill, and some of them are critical details, as we've been hearing today. I would be curious to understand how we would stay involved moving forward if we were to move forward without having these detailed discussions and ensuring that everything is covered, especially at a security and confidentiality level. You're obviously noticing a lot of questions and concerns in that area. Our group has those as well. I'm going to bring up a few specific points. I did submit testimony to the committee, so you should all have this as well. And I'll likely follow up based on some of what I've heard today if there's still some additional things to cover. One of the items that was discussed was the two different types of health certificates that are out there, CVI being the one that is for interstate travel or transfer, as well as the regular in-state health certificates. The discussion was around, how to differentiate an actual health certificate for transfer versus those who are just obtaining them for travel and other purposes. And I don't think that utilizing CVI certificates versus the general health certificates is going to work, since CVI can be used for both travel and transfer purposes. So we do have both of those health certificates that can be used for transfers. I did include in my testimony some ideas about data being submitted where maybe there's an indicator that the veterinarian would identify if this is a transfer health certificate or if it was for travel or other, or a duplicate. We do have duplicates because of I think it's actually a 14-day window that health certificates are good for. And if you don't sell your puppy, for example, within that 14-day period, you would need to obtain another health certificate. So it would be great to have veterinarians be able to indicate that this was in fact a duplicate, and that would help reduce some of that research that's necessary at the Department of Agriculture when reviewing the number of transfers anyone in particular has had. So that's something that I would like to have taken into consideration. As Nancy Holmes mentioned, the bill does outline rescue shelters and pet vendors as accessing the database to submit data. I don't think that's necessary or appropriate. Mr. Crawford had mentioned that licensed veterinarians in New Hampshire were the only ones who should be issuing health certificates. Therefore, I think they would be the only ones that would have a need to get health certificate data into the database. Shelters or pet vendors, for example, would not have the authority to create or issue a health certificate, therefore wouldn't need to get one into the system. This is also true for the waiver that was mentioned in 437:8, Roman numeral 2-A. I think we need to remove the line that mentions licensed pet vendor or other person authorized to submit the animal records database from being able to submit the waiver. So that's something that we need to take a look at. Moving on in that same section, Roman numeral 5, this is where the animal shelter facility exemptions come into play. We talked a little bit earlier about how shelters are exempt from submitting health certificates for dogs or cats or ferrets who have been obtained in New Hampshire. I do think that we do need to add information that has that data tracked in the system still, because those are still transfers. And if we want to ensure that those animals have been transferred healthy, whether they have a official health certificate or not, we should be considering how those are being tracked so that they are getting that level of tracking as well. In HB 249, this is another bill on animal shelter facilities. A line is being added to actually outline that shelters are required to submit health certificates if an animal is obtained from outside of New Hampshire and being transferred. While they may be doing that currently, it is actually not written into law. It was dropped out at some point. So we're trying to get that piece added back in, and I think it would be appropriate for that to be reflected in this bill as well. So you can see that on the second page of my testimony. I've outlined both of those items to make sure that they're considered. Secondly, in Roman numeral 6, the last words in that paragraph control the fact that health certificates only need to be submitted to the state currently upon request. And I think if we remove the upon request wording, then that's going to make sure that the law stipulates all health certificates need to be submitted moving forward. So we can ensure that the data is accurate in the database and that everyone is submitting those health certificates. And by everyone, I mean veterinarians. The last item that I wanted to bring up today was the fees. We talked about how the database was going to be funded and how this database is necessary due to the legislation that was put in place and putting hard to enforce laws on the Department of Agriculture. Due to that, I don't think that it is appropriate to have the fees put on the dog and cat breeders of New Hampshire. We didn't ask for those numbers to be reduced. We actually fought very hard against that. And so to have any fees to help fund this database, to help enforce the decreased threshold and categorizing as a pet vendor and requirement of being licensed and already paying a $200 license fee to become a pet vendor, or for everybody else who doesn't get to that threshold, I just think that it further burdens that community. And so we do need to look to other ways to fund this database. And lastly, I just want to support Nancy's discussion regarding EDI for the data transmission. I think that is a great way to help avoid some of the security concerns that we have here and getting the data needed where it needs to go. And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Angela. Is there any questions? Do you see any hands up? All right. I think we'll go off easy. Question.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. All right. Is there anyone else that's on who would like to testify? If so, please raise.
Yes, sir. My name is James Gaffney. I've had my hand up for a bit. I submitted a request to testify.
All right, Mr. Gaffney, your name's who do you represent and where are you from?
Myself, I live in Warner, New Hampshire.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead and please address the committee.
As reading through the statute, please forgive my brevity, but this statute is incoherent. I would urge the committee to address the problems with the statute before trying to expand upon it. I mean, there's a section in here that talks about duties of veterinarians. And then as part of that section, it goes on to discuss, you know, tagging of the animal, right? Like, so it's clear that it really wasn't really well thought out before it was passed. So now we're going to take a poorly written statute and we're going to expand upon it. And then we're going to we're going to create a database and put it on the internet that's accessible essentially theoretically by everyone, right? Because it has an internet presence. It's ripe to be hacked. I've now signed into a couple of hearings since you guys went to Zoom. And this is my feeling on it. The state can't handle doing simple things like having Zoom meetings for testimony. Do you really think we can handle personal information on in a database that's accessible over the internet? I don't. I mean, there's no discussion on how that database would be secured. I would urge the state to come up with a set of standards and processes and procedures for how the state would secure a database, not just for this use, but broadly in general. There really should be a standard that says, you know, the box gets put on a particular VLAN, that these are there are firewall rules to protect it, there are ACLs to protect it, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are no standards, and therefore this can't be secured. There's no expiration on the record, so the state is apparently obligated to keep and maintain these records forever. Why would the state want to keep these records? Why would we want our records kept by the state? They should be deleted after a year or 2 years or 5 years, right? It's just a hot mess. I mean, as I understand it, the whole motivation behind this statute revolved around thresholds for licensing. Is that a true statement?
Are you asking the chair a question?
I'm asking anyone. I mean, my understanding, right or wrong, is that the RSA was passed into law in order to handle the threshold, i.e. 25 dogs or 50 dogs or whatever it may be, so that the state can handle the whole licensing aspect of this. Well, it seems like we're chasing our tail over this, right? Instead of creating this database and this requirement for vets to submit all of this information so that in theory the state could tabulate, oh, now we have a person that's you know, crossed a threshold and we need to force their licensure, right? Instead of doing that, this information is already submitted to the town clerk and it's associated with a person and an address, right? We're required for our dogs and our cats to get rabies vaccines every year. So why are we putting a burden on veterinarians and individuals to transmit this data to the state so it can be collated or correlated in order to theoretically come up with who needs to be licensed, right? And then the enforcement piece of this. Instead, why aren't we asking our town clerks to transmit all of this information up to the state? And then boom, the state has the information. It's simple, it's elegant. Instead, we're creating this whole infrastructure to accomplish nothing. I really would urge the committee to ITL this bill or amend it so that it starts to fix some of the issues with the statute. I mean, you read through it as a normal person and it's incoherent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gaffney. Is there any questions? Or are you willing to take any questions from the committee?
Sure.
Are there any questions for Mr. Gaffney? Do you see any hands raised? Thank you, Mr. Gaffney. We appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, so we have another hand raised. Oh, yeah, Representative Bolden, did you have a question?
I have a question for the chair.
Sure.
I noticed that there's criminal penalties in this bill. Is this bill flagged to go to criminal justice or any other second committee?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
His question was, is this bill flagged to go to a second committee? And the answer is yes, it is. I'm not clear yet. I believe it's going to finance. I don't know that it's going anywhere else than that, but I would have to check with the Speaker's office. My understanding is it's going to finance next. Yes, please.
If it's not going to criminal justice, I assume it's part of our job as a committee to examine those criminal penalties and determine if they're appropriate. If we're the only policy committee.
We certainly, I would agree that we certainly should make sure we're putting forth good legislation. It certainly will go through the Senate as well, and where they'll assign it, I'm obviously unaware, But thank you for the question. All right, so we have Dennis Goulet with his hand up. Dennis, did you want to address the committee?
Yes, can you folks hear me all right? Okay,
Go ahead.
great. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Dennis Goulet. I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Information Technology for the Executive Branch of New Hampshire. I'm going to speak to both of the bills. I will start out with the security and privacy topic, which really I think covers both, and then I'll jump into another set of comments. First and foremost, I want to address the assertion in testimony that the state does not have standards for security and privacy of data. That is just simply incorrect. And we have processes that that are heavily involved as it relates to the acquisition of technology. And the standards for security and privacy are directly related to the type of information that we store. So, it's personal information, PII, as you would be storing here under this circumstance, and personal health information. Those are among the highest category of information. Therefore, we have the highest requirements for our vendor partners or for ourselves if we're writing software ourselves. That goes through the contracting process, which is reviewed both by the Department of Information Technology in RFPs, requests for proposals, and final contracts when awarded. AG's office is involved in that as well. And when we have legal questions, which sometimes come up with respect to how we would manage a certain type of data, they are always involved in that process in terms of approving the contract. So we do have a robust and mature process for acquiring technology that will, in fact, assure the security and privacy of data. Any system can be hacked, though, of course. So, and any process can be hacked. So that is, we've seen that over and over again in the United States. In the case of the question of EDI versus online access to data, one of the things about EDI that wasn't mentioned is that it does put a technology burden on the other end of the transaction. So, for example, we do EDI with lots of healthcare entities in the state of New Hampshire, and it's pretty easy for them to do. Like if it's a hospital or something, that's the kind of thing they do all the time. If it's a smaller entity, it's much more problematic, and definitely having online resources that are appropriately managed and secured is important. Finally, in terms of the security and privacy of data, one of the things we just we're working on and are implementing is the new sets of policies as it relates to monitoring of systems, and particularly systems that are online, so that our security, our SOC or our Security Operations Center can watch and see what's going on in an application. For example, one of the things we look at on some of our health and human services systems, and this is really enforced by the Center for Medicare, Medicaid Services, CMS, is that we watch for unauthorized access in real time. So things like that. So there really is a lot of robust technology being applied to these systems. And we also have very sophisticated defense in-depth technologies that protect the systems we have in our data center. And we also work to secure and make sure that if the systems are in the cloud, we are able to monitor them as well. So, so I think that concludes my comments on security and privacy. I will now move to resourcing. And this really is, I think, more specific to 532. I was disappointed to see that there's no expense side of the fiscal note there. While fiscal notes are generally for us no fun to complete, we do like to complete them for bills like this because it helps us assure the success of the program if it is enacted into law. And you heard Commissioner Jasper speaking earlier about resourcing and how long it takes to get anything done in the Department of Agriculture from an IT perspective. I would absolutely echo his comments there. And the Department of Agriculture has no full-time IT staff to address application things. They have one shared resource who supports 20 entities. That's 20. So he figured he's getting about 1/20th of a person, and that's what agriculture is paying for. We had a similar situation up until recently with the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. And so I've been here, in May I'll be 6 years as commissioner. And in the first 5 years, we got very little done there. I mean, we got some things done here and there, chipping away at it, but really we didn't get much done. OPLC recently funded a couple of positions, IT positions in my organization, but dedicated to them. And in the past few months, we've gotten more done in that organization from a modernization and an improving citizen service perspective than we had the entire 5 years before that. So I will echo Commissioner Jasper's, and in fact, I'm concerned that related to the success of this program without dedicated IT staffing, both for this program and the other programs inside of Department of Agriculture. I don't see us modernizing at any reasonable pace without that. We have a staffing model that fits well into the size of the Department of Agriculture that we've successfully used at the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. I think that staffing model, which is 2 people, would be perfect for ag. And I would encourage us to think about that, particularly as it relates to this program. And I would also encourage us to do a detailed fiscal note on the expense side, if possible, in the process. That concludes my testimony, and I'm now available to take questions.
Thank you. I perhaps have a favor to ask of you. Us in the committee room are having a little bit of a hard time to understand you. It's kind of muffled. Would it be possible for you to perhaps put these highlights in an email and send it to the committee?
Yes, I absolutely can.
That would be much appreciated. We do have a couple of hands up here for questions. Rep. Kaplan, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking my question. Commissioner Goulet, this is more of a general question, but could you address the statement by Commissioner Jasper that the Department of Agriculture is having databases designed by prisoners in the state? And is this particular database also being designed by prisoners in the state's correction system?
Thank you for the question, sir. That system that Commissioner Jasper is describing is, I think it's a very old system, predates my tenure, but no, we don't actually have use the Department of Corrections to do any of our IT work. But I think that it had been done many years in the past.
Thank you. Next, we have Representative Murray has her hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking my question, and thank you, Commissioner Goulet. Can you speak to some of the concerns around veterinarian submission or record concerns with regard to perhaps even when a veterinarian would submit a record electronically? Wouldn't there be some sort of verification or a receipt of submission that would give them confirmation that their data has been transferred?
Sure. Thank you. If they were accessing the system as is proposed, then they would, again, they get, once a form was entered or data was completed, they get acknowledgement that that data was successfully saved in the system. Typically, what we would do in an electronic data interchange scenario would be, there would also be an acknowledgement of receipt but it would be an offline acknowledgement. It would go back to them. So when we have, for example, if a hospital transfers information over to the Health and Human Services, then there needs to be an acknowledgement back that that data was received.
Thank you very much.
All right, I don't, any other questions for Mr. Goulet? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. We appreciate you coming in and addressing the committee.
Thank you for the time.
All right, I only see one more hand up, which is Nancy Holmes wants a second bite at the apple, I guess. So go ahead, Nancy. What have you got?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had two things. I think I whipped through the EDI stuff a little too quickly so that not everybody heard what I was saying, which was that not that we would use the exact EDI protocol, because I know exactly how much work that takes on either end, but that we use the concept of having the sender drop the data off and the updating be done on the side of the person with the database without the sender having to have their hands in the database directly. It was just to increase security for the transmission of the information.
Right.
The other thing was, I totally forgot to ask, was who's going to enforce that health certificates are obtained for transfer? This bill allows not just for puppies by vendors. This bill says anybody who is transferring any dog, cat, or ferret, kitten, or puppy, or whatever you call a ferret kit, all of those people will have to obtain a health certificate in order to transfer an animal. That means the general public. So far right now, nobody does this. Nobody. I don't think I've ever seen an adult animal offered for transfer with a health certificate, other than by a responsible breeder. And so, I mean, who's going to enforce that there are even going to be any health certificates to be put into the database? So as far as I know, nobody does this.
Nancy, I'm going to have to wrap up. You've had a shot here, and I've got a couple of people that want to speak. So thank you for your questions.
Yep.
All right, we have one more hand raised, Gina Scrofano, and I apologize if I got the last name wrong.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me okay?
You can.
Yes, good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Yes, my name is Gina Scrofano. You pronounced it perfectly. Thank you. I am calling today to speak in opposition of HB 438. I do believe that the creation of the animal records database is crucial for the state of New Hampshire. As Representative from Stratford shared when introducing HB 532, health certificates do not only indicate the current health and medical history of animals that are transferred in New Hampshire, which prevents animal suffering and the spread of disease, including those that are zoonotic and can be transferred from animals to humans, but also to monitor the number of animals transferred in New Hampshire, which directly links to the licensing and regulation of pet vendors and the enforcement of those laws and regulations. I would like to speak to one of the major reasons why the inefficient method of which health certificates are currently stored at the Department of Agriculture came to light, which was due to the occurrence of a slew of animal cruelty cases in New Hampshire over recent years involving breeders and the cruelty of hundreds of animals, including zoonotic diseases. In order for law enforcement and the state to determine how many transfers of animals took place in those cases and to help determine whether or not those breeders should also have been licensed and regulated, it was nearly impossible to sort through the tens of thousands of certificates the department received per year and track down the relevant certificates to review them. So that briefly speaks to the gravity of this issue. If we were to implement HB 532 and HB 438 as written, which prevents accessibility of law enforcement even by a subpoena, it in major part defeats the purpose of creating the database in the first place. Additionally, pet vendors, whether pet stores, breeders, or rescues, they are making the decision to breed and or sell or adopt out these sentient beings that are welcomed into the homes of residents and become companion animals. Any illnesses or ailments an animal may have not only could pose emotional and financial hardship, but also risk the health and safety of family members, neighbors, and communities. Residents have the right to access information on whether or not the pet vendor they are considering purchasing a valued companion from, additionally sometimes for thousands of dollars, are licensed, and whether or not those pet vendors have had any violations to state law or have been suspended. The public also has the right to know where the animals were initially transferred from, because when pet stores purchase animals from breeders to sell to the public, that information on where those animals were purchased from is included in the health certificate and the transfer records. Having access to that information before a purchase helps to prevent cruelty and the spread of disease because it speaks to the living conditions and the treatment of those animals. The reason why the need to know law, which is cited in this bill, RSA 91-A, was established was for the transparency of government actions for the public. Certainly that includes which pet vendors the state grants a license to and whether or not they have any violations of laws and regulations, similar to the US Freedom of Information Act, which is used on a daily basis just for these very purposes. Although I support the creation of the animal database, we must ensure that the data is accessible in order for it to be an efficient tool and for it to be meaningful. And that's all that I'd like to share with you today.
Thank you very much. We do have one hand raised. Representative Murray, did you have a question?
I do, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. This question is actually for the state veterinarian. Mr. Crawford, is this certificate, like large animals, for example, have Coggins in the event that they are, oh, yes?
No, we currently have Ms. Scrofano testifying. So if you,
oh, I'm so sorry.
Did you have a question for her?
I did not. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Scrofano? Thank you very much for testifying.
Thank you.
All right, listen, we're running up against a deadline here. We've got about 1 minute. So Representative Murray, if you want to make a quick question of Representative Crawford, I'll allow that. Representative, I'm elevating from state veterinarian to now an elected official. Or maybe that's not an elevation. I don't know. All right, go ahead, Representative Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize to the previous for the error. Mr. Crawford, so my question was with regard to large animals, like a Coggins would be issued to an equine animal. Similarly, with small animal transfer, isn't that some of the intent for the health certificate within 14 days to let folks know that those animals are healthy for transfer?
Yeah, the entire purpose of the official health certificate originally was to assure the health of that animal before it's transferred. It is, and I think Commissioner Jasper touched on this at the very beginning, that official health certificate is the only way that we have to know how many individual animals a particular entity is transferred. So that's why it's being used in that fashion too. But yes, the purpose is assuring animal health.
Thank you, Dr. Crawford.
Good thing. You're welcome.
Do you see any further hands raised? All right. I'd like to thank everybody for testifying. I'm going to read off the blue sheet. So for House Bill 532, we had 4 people sign in opposed, 1 in support, and 1 neutral. And for House Bill 438, we had 7 sign in support and 2 opposed. All right, seeing no further hands, I am going to close the hearing on House Bill 32 and House Bill 438. I'm going to turn the chairmanship over to Vice Chair Representative Aaron because I am introducing the next bill.
Thank you, Chair. Is this on? Thank you, Chairman Pearl. So I'd like to open the hearing for House Bill 226, which is the relative to repeal of law on produce safety. And to present this bill is the sponsor, Representative Howard Pearl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I come today before the E&A committee, and I thank you all for receiving my testimony to introduce House Bill 226. So the Department of Agriculture came to me and asked me to introduce this bill originally because the repeal date is coming up on the produce safety laws, and every 5 years we have them sunset, so that we have to review them and basically make them effective again by repealing the date. So the original intention of this bill was to extend that date from 2021 to 2026. There was another situation that was brought to light as we were approaching and about a stop sale order provision that is in RSA 426, which is a separate chapter of this law, which is RSA 426A. And that stop sale provision, it was a stretch whether the commissioner and his agents could apply that stop sale language to Chapter 426A if they found that someone was in violation of the inspection requirements in 426A. So I drafted an amendment, which I'm presenting to the committee today, to add that stop sale language that we modified slightly from Chapter 426 to make it appropriate to 426A and give the commissioner that authority. With that, I'm actually going to wrap up and let the commissioner speak a little further, if he would like to the provisions of this bill. Thank you. Are there any questions? I would certainly be willing to take some if there are.
Does anybody have any questions for Representative Pearl? Seeing none, I would invite Commissioner Jasper to please speak.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee, and thank you, Representative Pearl, for putting the bill and the amendment forward. To clarify, the FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act, originally was with the Department of Health and Human Services. That program was moved over to the Department of Agriculture a couple of years ago, before it was really implemented on the ground. It is a 5-year funded program, and that federal funding is up this year. And the intent was never to put any responsibility financially on the state to run the program. So thus the hard stop date. And we are assuming that the program will be funded. However, if it is not, I would hope the legislature would pass this, but that the bill would stay on the governor's desk until such time that we were assured that the feds were going to fund it. And I would ask the governor, if it's not funded by June 30th, that he veto the bill. In terms of the amendment, there is some question. I don't think it's worth arguing about in a court of law whether the commissioner has the ability to stop sale of a product that has not met the health safety standards within FSMA. And I think we all want to be sure that only food that meets those standards is offered for sale to our citizens. And so to clarify that, I would certainly make every effort under the current law to argue that I had the authorization. As I said, I just don't think it's worth having a fight when there's an easy fix here. So with that, I'll end my testimony and be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do I see any hands raised? Questions? No, I do not. So without any other questions, comments for this particular proposed legislation, I would close this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chairman. I don't know. I guess that gets confusing, Aaron. All right, so our next bill is going to be heard at 1 p.m., which will be House Bill 272. So we're going to recess until 1 p.m. and we will be back for House Bill 272. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
do we just, for however this works. If we're recessed till 1, do we just stay on or do we log back in?
Yes. I guess, yeah, I think it's recommended that you stay on and turn off your camera and your audio.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are in recess till 1 p.m.